After 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld, and generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
The war economy is a parasitic force that feeds off the destruction and suffering caused by armed conflict. It diverts resources from essential sectors like education, healthcare, and infrastructure, leaving societies in a state of perpetual instability and underdevelopment. Today we will be talking about one country that thrives on this parasitic force, the mighty USA. The United States has long been criticized for its involvement in wars around the world, driven by 2 basic motivations: making money from the panic and gaining control over natural resources in foreign lands. Let's start with making money during wars. A war bond is a debt security that government issues to finance military operations and other expenditures in times of war, without raising taxes to exorbitant levels. This practice has been around since the 16th century, when the Dutch government issued bonds to finance its war against Spain. Today, USA makes money from purchasing these war bonds issued by other countries. For example, they bought war bonds from Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. In the current scenario, America purchased $1 billion in Ukrainian war bonds in March 2022, and in November 23 the same trend was repeated as they acquired $1 billion in Israeli bonds adhering to the Hamas attack. Now let's talk about how the US tries to control natural resources through wars. One of the most common accusations against United States is that it has been pillaging oil from Iraq since the 2003 invasion. This accusation is based on the fact that the United States has been selling Iraqi oil below market value, and that a significant portion of the profits from these sales have gone to American companies. In addition to oil, the United States has also had a strong interest in controlling other strategic resources like minerals and rare earth elements. These resources are essential for production of a wide range of goods, including electronics and weapons. They also have a number of ways to exert control over these resources. One of them is to send military forces to intervene in these countries that have large reserves of these resources. Another way is to use its economic power to pressure countries to sell these resources to American companies at below market value. The United States' desire to control strategic resources is a major factor in its foreign policy. This desire has led them to intervene in a number of countries, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. These interventions have been costly, both in terms of human life and financial resources. Today, as we see a series of conflicts unfolding across the globe, like the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war or the never-ending Israel-Palestine dispute, the threat of a third world war looms large. While the United States has overtly engaged in these conflicts through NATO and allied forces, a more sinister force, the war economy, operates behind the scenes. In today's global economy, the United States has been accused of viewing its military as its most valuable asset, which helps fund its nefarious activities around the world. In 2022, when the Russia-Ukraine war was in full swing, global military spending reached $2.2 trillion in 2022, with the United States accounting for 40% of it, with a defense budget of $877 billion. But guess what? USA has been one step ahead all the time. In 2020, while the other nations grappled with COVID-19 pandemic and its associated financial burdens, the US dedicated over half of its discretionary spending, that is about $1.6 trillion, to its defense sector. This decision highlights the US unwavering commitment to military expansion even in the face of pressing domestic and international challenges. Let's walk you through how their current war economy operates. Raytheon Technologies Corporation is an American multinational and one of the largest aerospace and defense manufacturers in the world by revenue and market cap, as well as one of the largest providers of intelligence services. On October 24, 2023, on their earnings call, a Wall Street analyst noted Israel's war as an opportunity that fits quite nicely with the company's portfolio. Raytheon's executive agreed they'll see a benefit. So, is it just helping the corporates or is there more to the tale? Congress likely knew that Russia was seriously planning an invasion as far back as November. On November 13, 2021, Ukraine warned the global community that Russia has amassed 100,000 troops at their border. Around November 2021, various US Congress members disclosed their trades, which showed that they have been accumulating 40 different stocks that were directly or indirectly affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, which by the way started way ahead in the future, that is around February 2022. So while millions of refugees are suffering from the war, the so-called people's leaders are sitting at their homes comfortably and minting money out of this havoc. This brings us to the canny capitalism part. Ukraine recently announced that their president Volodymyr Zelensky had a video teleconference with BlackRock chief executive Larry Fink. The pair apparently struck a deal to coordinate investment efforts to rebuild the war-torn nation. All of this is pretty frustrating. It is almost given that BlackRock is receiving hefty compensation from the Ukrainian government for providing guidance on this reconstruction roadmap. Given that its economy is in ruins and that fighting a war is an expensive endeavor, where is the funding currently coming from for the Ukrainian government? Of course, the United States government. U.S.A. has provided $77 billion in direct budgetary support for Ukraine's government to avoid shortfalls and outright bankruptcy. And President Joe Biden has promised to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Looking at these charts, we can observe that around 61% of total aid received by Ukraine was military in nature. Also, out of all the aids given by various countries, US has the highest share of military aid. This gives boost to the defense industry of US, which it thrives on. This leads us to the following conclusion. The Ukrainian government is paying big bucks to BlackRock thanks to the money that ultimately comes from the pockets of everyday Americans through taxes. So the ultimate winners of this entire scenario is BlackRock and other American multinationals. It does make you wonder about fairness, especially considering it's the hard-earned money of the middle class in the United States. Let's give you another interesting fact. Apart from the restructuring contract, BlackRock is also earning from its stakes in various defense multinationals in USA, including Raytheon. With a deal like this, why would anyone ever want peace? Now let's talk about the current game plan. Earlier this year, the BRICS nations challenged the dollar's supremacy by exploring alternative currencies, posing a threat to the influential families that are tied to US. In response, the US leveraged the Hamas attack on Israel to bomb Gaza, creating global unrest. The mysterious undetected missile attacks, despite Israel's advanced defense, suggested a possibly staged attack. There is a possibility that this entire situation has been fueled by US, driven by its desire to maintain the dominance of the dollar. The real question is, what are they actually up to? Because recently, in this very year, there were two instances which could have led US into bankruptcy. The most recent debt ceiling crisis occurred in the United States in early 2023. The debt ceiling is the legal limit on the amount of money that a government can actually borrow. When the government reaches the debt ceiling, it cannot borrow any more money, which could lead it to default on its obligations. In January 23, the United States reached its debt ceiling of $31.4 trillion. At the time, the US Treasury Department said it could use extraordinary measures to keep paying its bills only until June 23. However, if the Congress did not raise the debt ceiling by that time, the government can actually default on its obligations. In order to avoid a default, Congress passed a bill in June 23 that suspended the debt ceiling until January 2025. This means that the government will not have to worry about reaching that debt ceiling again until that time. Then around September 30th, the United States faced yet another crisis that could have led to a full-blown government shutdown for 45 days. There was a fierce debate going on between the Democrats and Republicans over funding for the government. Democrats wanted to include funding for Ukraine in the spending bill, while the Republicans did not. The two parties were unable to reach an agreement on the bill, which led to the possibility of a complete shutdown. However, in the end, a stopgap spending bill was passed, and on the opposition leader who raised these questions, Kevin McCarthy, was ousted as a House Speaker in a historic vote. Today, if you Google his name, you'll see a series of rubbish lawsuits opened up against him, all this for questioning the enormous funding going towards Ukraine. So you're smart enough to connect all the dots now. While all of this is happening, an intriguing trend has been noticed. The American rich are actually migrating away from the American dream. We have been driven away by mounting calls to tax the rich, political tensions in the US, unpredictable markets because of the war in Ukraine, rising crime rates and gun violence, and conflict over societal issues like gender equality and racism. America's rich who want more options are now migrating to countries like Portugal, Malta, Spain, Greece, and Italy, which offer golden visas and migration programs. More investors, C-suite execs, and entrepreneurs are migrating to future-proof their wealth, seeking greener pastures for investment and business growth, safer destinations to raise their families. So while everyone is chasing to migrate to America, the rich with much more insider knowledge are actually fleeing out of the country. Now with such crisis going on in the country, why would US like to allocate a majority chunk of its budget to the defense sector instead of sectors such as infrastructure, health, and education? On top of that, the major question here is the US government so self-centered that it wants to continue being a superpower that bad at the expense of its own economic stability? Or is it actually that they are funding their own economy by selling weapons and creating an artificial demand for them through these never-ending wars?